get this straight. In principle, it's never okay to hit anyone, Nazi or otherwise. But when Richard Spencer was punched while giving an interview in the street, it was a cathartic moment for many.
It's unethical to punch a neo-Nazi in the face, but you should take the chance every time.
All I care about is free speech and free expression. I want people to be able to do and say anything. These days, you're right, that's a conservative position.
Please clap.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Commoners Podcast. I am, as always, joined by Adam.
Hello.
How you doing?
Yeah, not bad. This has been a fairly good week. Very quiet, actually, news-wise here in Europe. Not a lot has gone on this week, so it's been nice. It's been relaxing.
Well, if dear listeners, you heard our political animals on Friday, it has not been quiet in the United States.
No. In fact, the majority of the news over here is the continual cycle of ludicrousness that seems to emit from the Trump administration at the moment. So.
I feel like most people in other countries right now are sort of like the proverbial neighbor at their window with popcorn, watching what the neighbors are doing. Yeah. Terrified.
The only difference is that the neighbor's house is on fire and your house is very close to it.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, well, your house is close to them and your neighbor's trying to put the fire out with gasoline. It's insane. That aside, though, I hear congratulations are in order for you.
Yeah, that's right.
You got into a pretty prestigious program at Barcelona. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, I'm not sure if I would call it prestigious, but I've been accepted to a master's program in Barcelona that actually studies a lot of what we're talking about here in this podcast. So it's a master's in current democracy that looks into nationalism, federalism, and multiculturalism. So
oh, wow.
It's quite useful for such a podcast. So it means that in September that my wife and I and our son will be moving to Barcelona in Spain, which will be lovely.
You did make the decision then?
Yeah, we made it this morning.
Wow.
So that will be happening.
So I need to get out to Edinburgh and visit you soon.
Yes. Yeah, if you want to visit Edinburgh, you need to do it by September.
That program, I think, is going to help this podcast quite a bit. I mean, the things that you'll be studying it's just going to give us a vast amount of material for topics.
It fits in so well that I'm surprised that the podcast came first, actually, because you'd almost think that I thought of the podcast, or that we thought of the podcast in light of such a program coming up, but
right.
It's the other way around.
Well, and now you won't have to waste as much time researching because it will be going towards your degree as well.
Right. That's right. That's exactly right.
Oh boy. Okay. Today we would honestly, I'm sure, Adam, you would love to be able to talk about Donald Trump more. You'd love to be able to talk about what's going on in the world politically.
It does seem to provide stuff to talk about.
Yeah, but I don't think that we can. I think there's some really legitimate things within the left that we need to begin addressing. I know our pilot episode for this podcast essentially was calling out the left for what they've done wrong and what led us to this point. But in that episode, we really talked about governments and politicians and candidates and a Democratic Party, the Labor Party, what was done wrong by those entities, which sort of made people lose their love of those parties and for them to lose the support of average people. But what we didn't address is what individual people are doing to respond to the rise of the right around the world. And sad to say, I haven't been impressed with the way that the left has been responding to Donald Trump, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed. If we're going to have any sort of consistency or philosophical, not even philosophical, but moral high ground, we need to hold to our principles. And it doesn't seem like people, maybe not everyone, but there's the vocal bits of the left seem to not be supporting truly liberal positions. For example, it seems as though a lot of people on the left, young people in particular, which is scarier for me because that's the upcoming generation, in places where you would look for there to be the biggest and freest marketplace of ideas and free speech, like universities, you're seeing a revolt against the very essence of free speech and allowing people to talk that you disagree with. Briefly on last episode, I touched on the UC Berkeley episode where Milo Yiannopoulos was not allowed to speak. And literally, the cops ended up shutting down his event because the protesters were so violent, they caused over $100,000 worth of damage. After Trump was inaugurated, when there were protests going on and the anti-fascist group, as they call it, where it was protesting in Washington, D.C., Richard Spencer, who admittedly is a neo-Nazi, he's a despicable human being, was punched on live television or a live interview that he was doing. He was sucker punched by a protester, even though he wasn't being violent at all. He wasn't even saying anything that was horrendously abhorrent at the time, if you watch the video. But he was sucker punched in the face. And then we had Newsweek, BuzzFeed, and The Guardian, which we'll get to in a little bit, defending these actions. Defending punching somebody in the face who's done nothing, who has not done anything violent towards anyone else, or at least at the time they weren't doing anything violent to anyone else. And Newsweek actually even ran an article talking about asking if it was ethical to punch a neo-Nazi. And they were interviewing an actual ethicist, and I think the ethicist actually said to them, should we bring your mother to this conversation? Do you really not know if it's ethical to punch somebody that you disagree with?
I would say that it's ethical. It's unethical to punch a neo-Nazi in the face, but you should take the chance every time. So I'm not sure if I completely agree with you on the basis of this. It's one of those things in which, particularly with Nazism, like we've seen the outcome of Nazism. We know what Nazism does. At what point do you step in and actually take a Bush administration approach, a pre-attack, before something escalates into something worse?
Okay, so then let me ask you this: if there's a moderate Muslim who's never done jihad or and never blown anything up or killed anybody in the name of Islam, but tells you that they think that apostates and non-Muslims, really, in an ideal world, they would be put to death because they do believe in an ideal world there would be Quranic law. What would you say to that? Would you say that at any chance you have to punch that person? Because we have seen the outcomes of radical Islamic theology. Sure. And thought.
Yeah, I think, again, it would be unethical to do it, but again, you would take the chance every time, because
even somebody who's never done a violent action,
because
it's all rhetoric.
Because if we're talking about kind of liberalism in a sense, what we're saying is, well, if you want to define liberalism, it's the freedom to, it's the sovereignty of the individual. It's the freedom to speak your mind, to speak your opinion, to live your life unburdened. It's freedom even to equality, in a sense, I'd argue. And so if there is ever an ideology that is counter to the liberal ideology, I would argue that there needs to be some type of a fight to protect. So, for instance, let's take Nazism again, and let's say that we live in a world in which there is a large population of Nazis somewhere in a fantastical continent that doesn't actually exist. And they started immigrating to the United States in huge droves, massive droves, millions upon millions of people coming into the States. In the democratic system, their particular candidates and their particular viewpoints would have to make their way into the political system.
Okay.
So at some point, there has to be foundational principles and views that are unarguable. That just can't be changed, that can't be challenged. That the hope is, of course, that these are, for us, liberal views, democratic views, sovereignty of the individual views. And so I do think there might be a place to actually defend
punching a neo-Nazi.
Again, the even under liberal ethics, it would be unethical. But I would argue that there's a place in which we need to protect the foundational ideas and principles that we have when they're threatened by other ideologies.
I agree with you, but I don't think that it should be physical violence. I mean, you fight that stuff in the open. I think the biggest problem, so for instance, in the United States, okay, and I think we would both agree that we have an overwhelmingly left-leaning mainstream media. Okay, that's not a controversial thing to say.
No.
And I own that, obviously, and I admit that. And that's one thing that I admit to conservatives because they're right. But what that has functionally done is it's taken opinions that are unsavory and it's put them underground. It's put them to a place where you can't address them in the light, and they grow as these movements like the alt-right. The alt-right isn't a mainstream movement. It's an internet movement. Like things like Breitbart, Drudge Report. These things are pushed into the darkness and not addressed in the mainstream, and they are basically just funneling people into a completely opposite end of the same echo chamber. So the mainstream media of liberalism is an echo chamber for, moderates and liberals and the people who have alternative viewpoints to that, other than, like Fox News and things like that. And even then, Fox News is universally mocked pretty much. But if you have a diametrically opposed view, it's not debated in the open because it's assumed that you're wrong. But if you think you're right, you're going to go seek out people who think that you're right. Right? And you're not going to be hearing arguments against it. You're going to be in an echo chamber. And I think that we run the risk of doing just that.
At the same point, though, and perhaps on the opposite side of the spectrum, is that instead of these ideologies going underground, what you've got instead is, the Trump movement, the Front National movement in France, is a populist movement that is very much out in the open. It's very much a taking advantage of the feelings of the people and pushing it to your own ends. So, for instance, suddenly you've got the United States, which for its entire history has been an immigrant nation, apart from a brief period of nativism that happened in the 1800s, 1880s, 1890s.
Yes.
But turning incredibly anti-immigrant, or at least voting for a fairly anti-immigrant president.
Not a majority, though. Not a majority.
Not a majority. Nonetheless, there is a large swath of people that voted for a populist candidate who arguably has some ideas contrary to the foundational principles of the United States, such as freedom of the press. We saw that in his press conference, which I think we'll be getting to a little bit kind of towards the end of the show.
Yeah, I don't think that we're going to be discussing the press conference today. I think it's just going to be more highlights to end off the episode. But so at what point do we get to it being a paradox where we have liberal values, we have the ideas of democracy, but then we challenge the results of a democratic process when it gives a result that we don't like and don't agree with? So yes, Steve Bannon, not a nice character. Okay, he's in the Trump administration, but I do have faith in the checks and balances in the government. I mean, you're seeing Trump's immigration ban was struck down by the courts, and if it goes to the Supreme Court, it will likely be upheld that way. We have elections every 2 years, and if Trump screws up enough, which I'm confident he will, you should see a surge in Democratic victories in 2018 if the left plays their cards right and actually messages well. So I have a hard time thinking that we are on the road to something like a fascist country, because, even people that I know who support Trump realize what he's saying and a lot of things that he's doing are bad. But the way that he is... I hate when I'm put in a position where I have to defend Donald Trump, right? But the way that he is portrayed in the media, yes, he is a buffoon. You can watch the words he says, and his press conference was an embarrassment, for lack of a better term. But he is misrepresented in a lot of the things that he does in the media. There's no way of getting around that. And while he is horrible, I don't agree with his positions. I wouldn't say that I'm overly fearful of something like the United States just becoming a fascist country with President Trump. And even with the right-wing parties in Europe, would you say that's something bordering on like a Nazism? You know, is there Nazi ideology fueling the movement?
Well, no, but 2 points I would make is that, one, Germany didn't become a fascist country overnight, and like they consistently voted for Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party in a few elections before the Enabling Act took effect in the
in the Reichstag,
exactly, in the late 1930s. Yeah. And the second point is that, you know, there are liberal democracies in the world that make illegal ideologies. Germany and Austria, and I believe Poland, ban Nazism. So there are liberal progressive countries that ban ideologies. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. It all depends on what you want your country to be. Like, either your country is a democracy first, in which majoritarianism rules, in which anything can change, your constitution can change, your foundational principles can change, anything can change. Or you adhere to a particular set of values that just cannot be changed by democracy, such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, you know, and so on and so forth. The split of power between branches of government. This should all be unchangeable. So the danger you have in democracy is that, well, your foundational principles can change at any point.
Well, I think that's more of an issue for countries that don't have a constitution.
Like the UK?
Like the UK, so maybe you're more concerned about it. But, I mean, we have survived people like Richard Nixon in this country.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Trump is the end of America. He's not going to bring... I don't think he's going to... And he's certainly not the next Hitler. He's not going to bring down the states. It would be unfair to compare, and I disagree with every major outlet that does it, opinion piece that does it, compare Trump to Hitler. There's no comparison.
He's not even close.
The art of the deal is not Mein Kampf. There's nothing somewhere.
Not to mention, he didn't even write it.
Adolf Hitler had an ideology and a strategy going in to the halls of power. Trump had a brand deal and presumably a network deal before he was surprisingly elected president, even by his own...
Yeah, I mean, I look at Trump like your 70-year-old uncle who doesn't know anything and just has an opinion, and he's an asshole. It's the best way to describe him, but like...
But here's the thing. Almost half of the country voted for him. I know that there was a 3 million vote difference, 3 million vote difference, but the percentage is only a few percent.
Mm-hmm.
What is a far more valuable comparison, I think, is to compare Germany of the 1930s to the America of the mid 2010s, and I think the comparison. So. I'm not saying that Trump is the end of America, but what I am saying is that is the American populace at a point in which they're willing to erode some of the core foundational principles of their liberal democracy to bring in something that perhaps feels more secure, that feels more nativistically American, in order to protect themselves, in order to build up their reputation in the world again. Because remember, Germany pre-World War II was suffering from, post-World War I, which essentially saw it disarmed, which saw it weakened, right, which saw its economy thrown into the tanks. Adolf Hitler came along saying we should be making Germany a world power again. And so I think that's a far more valuable comparison.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about, the whole argument about making America's image around the world seem stronger or better is just horse crap. Obama did so much to repair America's status around the world from what Bush did.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But people don't realize that because they don't look at what Obama did as a show of strength.
Yeah. What they're assuming is that the show of strength is very much a military one and not what I would call or what is called soft power. Essentially, your ability to mediate, your ability to discuss and be a diplomat.
Soft imperialism is what the United States is kind of addicted to.
But Europe loved Obama. Loved it. Their view of the states under Obama was much higher than what it is now.
The thing about Obama is that people look at it and he didn't put a lot of boots on the ground, but he did intervene in like 7 different countries. He intervened in a civil war in Yemen, on the side of Saudi Arabia, of all things. He expanded the drone program, and he didn't do a whole lot to. I mean, yeah, he de-escalated in Iraq, but he didn't do a whole lot to scale back American interventionism. So I don't understand why people look at him and view him as some sort of weak president militarily, when, if anything, he sort of just used our military resources in a more efficient way, not putting boots on the ground. But that's neither here nor there. I guess probably what you're more worried about, comparing America now to Germany of the 1930s, is that Trump is paving the way for a much more effective populist leader who could lead us in more of a fascistic, isolationist direction. Is that what you're saying?
Specifically, that he is a leader that will encourage the population to believe in his ideas, so much so that later on, perhaps not even within the next 4 or 8 years, depending on how much whether Trump gets re-elected or not, maybe not even within his administration, but nonetheless paves the way for a populace that's willing to erode their own liberal and again foundational principles for the sake of protection, for security, for ethnocentricity. And I think that is essentially where the left comes in. I think the left does come into...
Well, yeah, I mean, we have to win people back.
Exactly, right. So it is about the people, and it's about our ability to win over the people in a way that populists and populism has been able to win over people.
Well, I mean, we there's a very easy way to do that, and that's just to get back to liberal principles and liberal policy goals rather than just moral goals. You understand kind of what I'm saying?
Yes. The social outcry. What would you call it? The social justice warriors, I think it was called.
Yes, social justice warriors, SJWs.
That's right.
I mean, there's I like doing podcasts like this, YouTube. There are careers made out of just complaining about social justice warriors because they have such a reputation. I mean, look at Sargon, the Amazing Atheist. I think JonTron. These people make tons of money, just shit talking SJWs on the internet, which ironically is one of the only places that you can do it, because that sort of rhetoric is being pushed off of college campuses. It's being pushed off of mainstream media outlets, which I think that's a problem with the left. And we can go back and forth whether or not you want to discourage ideological frameworks, but I think the best way of doing that is just showing people how stupid they are. No, seriously.
Yeah, winning over the people there. It's by the way.
Okay, so maybe that's a little harsh. but seriously, so okay, for instance, you have Tommy Lehren. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's on The Blaze, which is Glenn Beck's network. She's she's a beautiful blonde who goes on TV and complains about liberals all the time and calls out. Actually, if you look at her content and get past the bombastic rhetoric and calling people snowflakes and wimps and all this kind of stuff, which people love. I mean that gets clicks. If you actually dig into the content that she's doing, most of it's fluff, but a lot of it is good, reasonable points, and it's actually pointing out liberal hypocrisy. And the thing is, when she's in her element there, she's very effective at what she does. I mean, you can watch that, and if you're not politically astute, or if you're not really going out there trying to fact check the news, a lot of what she says, it makes sense. And it makes sense to people, like just average people. And when you get her on a forum in which you can actually call her out on what she's saying and force her to back up what she's saying with, facts, she loses her ability to do that because she is not in her, safe space. For instance, she went on Bill Maher, and Bill Maher, the whole panel just talked circles around her and made her look foolish. And she couldn't defend herself. And it wasn't even trap questions. It was just facts and information that she could not substantively prove wrong. And that, to me, is way more effective than trying to silence them and not letting them talk. If somebody's listening to them all the time and is just, agreeing with everything that they say, and then suddenly they go on to, and they get challenged, they go on to Bill Maher and get challenged, and if you're able to watch that, if that's happening mainstream, it might change your mind. And I think that's much more effective than you just saying, well, we're not even going to entertain that thought because it's unsavory, or we don't agree with it. So that's one example. I mean, so I when we talk free speech, I think there's a reason why the First Amendment is the First Amendment, guaranteeing free speech and free expression.
Yeah, the only thing, and this is, by the way, I don't advocate punching people in the face in public. just
you just did.
just to make clear. What I do wonder, though, is, and I wonder if you would agree with me, just for clarification, is the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, the protection of the freedom of speech from the government, or if you say something stupid in public, you can expect to be punched in the face by another one of your citizens. Obviously, that in itself is a crime, the punching in the face. But
right, speaking purely constitutionally, obviously the 10 amendments that are the Bill of Rights, those are constrictions upon government. They're telling the government things that it cannot do to people and or citizens. Okay.
Sure.
So you're right. The First Amendment, it enshrines the right to say what you want and not get thrown in jail. Okay? It does not enshrine the right for you to say what you want and not expect to have repercussions, or expect people to be angry with you, or expect to get fired from your job. Right?
Or punched in the face.
You're No, because okay. Yes, you're right. The First Amendment guarantees your right against punishment by the government for speaking your mind and expressing yourself, okay, which is great. But it also enshrines a founding ideal of the country. It's a founding ideal of America that people have the right to say what they think, okay? And I just am uncomfortable when you normalize a population being okay with silencing people. That's I guess my issue, is that, yeah, the guy's an asshole, and he is a neo-Nazi, and he says terrible stuff. But to punch him in the face for just saying words, yeah, you know what? If he's out there trying to build a gas chamber in his backyard, then yes, obviously physical action is warranted. But if he's just talking, you delegitimize yourself. You delegitimize yourself. And can we just play? Can I play a clip for you?
Sure, go ahead.
The Guardian. This lady Nesreen Malik, I think her name is. She did a video basically defending this guy whoever it was who punched Richard Spencer in the face.
When they go low, we go high,
said Michelle Obama, amid the rising ugliness of Trump's campaign. Well, going high doesn't always work. Some positions simply cannot be entertained, let alone argued against. There is this fallacy on the left around reasoned debate. Don't assault and boycott racists and misogynists. Debate with them. Don't go low, go high. Be better. But why? Why should we be better?
Okay, so she just literally just said, why be better? Why be better?
I think that is a brilliant analysis. it gets right. So this.
Go ahead. I'm gonna let you talk.
Sure. I mean, this gets right to the heart of one of the things that I'm really, really interested in is this kind of paradox of wanting to be moral creatures without having anything to actually define morality by. So from, again, a particularly Christian perspective, I think it's very interesting when morality kind of comes into the play, comes into the fore, because what she's essentially saying is that there is no definition necessarily of better. We get to create our own definition of better. So from a postmodern perspective, technically, subjectively, it's very, very much appropriate to punch someone in the face, even if they disagree with the ice cream flavor that you quite like to partake in.
Okay, yeah, but like, do you not? I guess my question would be: do you not see how problematic that is, though? To just essentially say that, yeah, morality and ethics be damned. Why be better? Why be better than these people? Let's just resort to their tactics. Do you think that helps your argument at all? Does it put you in a position where you're going to convince somebody?
Well, perhaps then to play the devil's advocate a little bit is it okay to defend your particular ideology when you know, quote unquote, I'll put that in quotations there, that your ideology is the one that protects people's rights, equality, dignity, and voice. So in other words, in order to protect the underlying foundational principles of, our liberal democracies, is it then okay to subvert, paradoxically, those particular ideas in order to protect it? Because in other words, then you open it up to subversion itself, don't you?
So basically, you have to defy liberalism to protect liberalism.
In a sense, if the particular ideas are particularly aggressive towards liberalism, wouldn't that make sense? So, in other words, if you have, again, we talk about half your country from this fictional land of Nazi land, your country being infiltrated by these people, would you not want to protect your own ideal? And I get what you're saying. But at some point, there needs to be more than just argument, especially if they are not willing to participate in that debate or in that argument. Now, so I get what you're saying about Tommy Lehren being on Bill Maher's show and the ability to run circles around her, but at the same time, how many people from the populist side are actually willing to see, or even willing to give a place to allow folks like Bill Maher and other liberal folk to run circles around. In other words, that they're not particularly interested in debate. They are interested in ideology. Okay,
but then you are as well. If you're going around punching people in the face for disagreeing with you, you're not. you and you're not even operating on your ideology very effectively either, because you are undermining your ideology to protect
your
it.
idea. Well, maybe it's a realpolitik instance then in which.
Okay. Yeah, but that no. Realpolitik. I only apply that standard to governments. I don't apply that standard to individuals.
Individuals are political though, and they make political choices, particularly when it comes to their political ideology. So in other words, even tactical voting is an instance of realpolitik for an individual within a political sphere.
Yes, that's true. But there's a difference between how you vote and how you talk and how you protest and punching somebody because they're saying something you don't like.
Which, by the way, I don't not advocate again. But nonetheless.
Okay. Well, you're making that hard for me to believe here.
My fear for liberals, I guess, is more that they could be losing a fight that the opposition doesn't actually want to participate, or at least play by the rules in, if that makes sense. So, in other words, in a realpolitik way, how far do you go to actually protect the values that you hold dear? Now, this is hypothetical because I know I've essentially more or less averted the entire point of this podcast, which is more or less to argue for the idea that, liberals should be able to debate and jovially discuss the ideas with our fellow citizens, but at some point I think there's a realism as well that has to be confronted. So I guess that's my own, and again, I don't actually advocate punching the people that you disagree with in the face, but at what point, and up to what point, do you defend the ideas that you actually do think are necessary to protect?
Well, I think the most important thing is rather than attacking individuals, it's attacking ideas. So we are veering into an area that conservatives think. I wouldn't say it's liberal. It's this collectivist mindset of judging people based on ideas that they hold or groups that they belong to. So, you know, people like Trump, who want their immigration ban, which is clearly aimed at Muslim countries. It's not a Muslim ban, obviously. I disagree with that characterization. Immigration ban, travel ban from some select countries for obviously ideological reasons, and the animus behind it is that he believes people who subscribe to an idea are somehow less worthy of rights, okay? And that we can strip these rights away because we disagree with their ideology, or we think that, you know, Ahmed is gonna invariably come to the United States and blow us up, right? Because we can't understand that not everybody holds to that ideology. It's just you group people and you attack their rights because you disagree with them and because you look at the outcomes that have happened because of the ideas that are held by people in that group. So, yeah, Richard Spencer, he's a neo-Nazi. Nazis are horrible. I'm not trying to defend Nazis here. And their ideology has led to bad things happening. But that doesn't mean that we can then punish and hurt people inside that movement because they hold those beliefs, unless they are hurting you or hurting somebody else physically. There's a principle that I sort of hold to, is that you shouldn't use a level of force against somebody that isn't proportional to the level of force that they're using against you. So if somebody's using words against you, you should use words against them. If somebody's using physical violence against you, then you are able to use physical violence against them in self-defense. But you look like the bad guy when you come out and punch somebody for talking. You create a sympathetic figure. Like when you protest and throw a shit fit when Milo comes to talk at UC Berkeley, a relatively unknown person. Like, he wouldn't be getting millions upon millions of views if it wasn't for this incident. Because people are like, oh, well, why are you trying to silence what he's saying? And he goes on all these talk shows, and he gets a book deal. And he's going to be reaching a far wider audience. This guy would never have gotten a book deal without all this controversy. So, you're spreading his message by abandoning your principles and becoming the worst person. Like you are responding in a way that is ultimately spreading his message. Why would you want to do that? Why wouldn't you, rather than, you know, try to shut him down? And here's the problem. If you shut him down and don't allow him to talk, and you don't respond to him, I'll play a clip. I'm going to play a clip later, but essentially, I love hockey. Wayne Gretzky. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Okay, you're going to lose 100% of the time if you don't participate in the debate. Right?
Right. So essentially what you're advocating then, and you make a compelling case, and I do agree with you. I just enjoy the debate. I'm trying to save face. By the way, we can cut that a little bit.
No, that's fine. I mean, this podcast episode is about whether or not the left is still liberal, and we can disagree on that.
Well,
or if the left is trending out of being liberal. Because the way that they're acting towards people that they disagree with, that's not liberal. I'm sorry, it's not.
So essentially what you're advocating for is a Martin Luther King Jr. style...
Absolutely.
No, maybe not civil.
Absolutely.
Does that in any way, do you think, kind of portray the image of victimization? Or is that... Or am I reading into the parallels a little bit too much?
Victimization of who?
So, so for instance, if you take an MLK Jr. approach, do you take on the victimization in the same way that African Americans during the civil liberties fight would have, of, you know, they themselves were victims of injustice. Is that really true for the left? Or am I drawing too many parallels?
I think that they should. So this lady, Nesreen Malik from The Guardian, thank you for bringing up Martin Luther King, because I actually have a quote from him, from his letter from Birmingham jail, that I want to read, that clearly this lady from The Guardian has not. He says, quote, "Over the past few years, I have consistently preached that nonviolence demands that the means we use must be as pure as the ends we seek. I have tried to make clear that it is wrong to use immoral means to attain moral ends." And that's something that we can't forget, because, okay, what are the most effective civil rights movements in the past? Were they violent? Overwhelmingly, they were not. I mean, you think about Mahatma Gandhi, you think about Nelson Mandela, you think about Martin Luther King Jr. And they're taking it to a level that, like, I'm saying I wouldn't take it to. If people are punching you in the face, then yes, you would be morally justified to punch back. They took it to a level where, even though they were being physically assaulted, they didn't do that. He would be rolling over, I'm sure he is rolling over in his grave, looking at people who are punching people for words, when he was having dogs sicked on him and sprayed with water and punched and beaten by police because he was trying to get basic rights. We're not fighting for basic rights, right? In a weird way, we are denying rights to those people, right? We are trying to deny their right to speak, or at least the people who are punching people are trying to deny their right to speak. And you look at these effective civil rights movements, and what were they dealing with? They were dealing with open, systematic, racial discrimination and racism and segregation, and a system literally where they were not equal.
Yeah.
Like literally, they couldn't be in the same schools. They couldn't go to the same water fountains. This was before the Civil Rights Act. It was 100% institutionalized racism, and we can debate whether or not that's to what extent that still exists. But, you know, black people and white people can get married now. Like, that wasn't allowed back then. And the ends that they used were so effective because it was so clear who was right and who had the moral high ground. And what's happening now when you're punching people for speaking or rioting to the point and causing damage to personal property because you don't want this person to talk, you are blurring the lines between who has the moral high ground and who does not. And that's what I find to be dangerous, and that's why I can't abide it. I'm not an absolutist about almost anything, but I am a free speech absolutist. I'm sorry, I really am. And I get upset when people get fired for things that they say. I think that's ridiculous. I mean, they're well within their rights to do it, right? My work could fire me for this podcast, and they'd be well within their rights to do it. But personally, I would never do it, and I would never defend it. And that's what I'm worried about. You know, you see these icons of liberalism, and you can debate whether or not, to what extent Martin Luther King was a liberal, but he had this right. He had this right. Well, his approach to creating societal change was 100% right, and you can see that because of how effective it was.
All right, and certainly when you look back historically, when you do look at Gandhi, MLK, history vindicates them in a way that puts the other side to shame. So yes, of course, you do make a compelling argument.
In a way that history will not vindicate these people.
Correct.
I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. They're going to look back at that and it's going to be viewed as a tumultuous time. It's going to be viewed as something that where there were riots on both sides, and not even necessarily on both sides, but it's going to be viewed as a time in which people were legitimately trying to suppress the speech of the other side. And I just can't get behind that no matter what. And we might disagree, but that's fine. Which is good because we mostly agreed so far, and it's actually it's invigorating to actually be arguing with somebody. I like it.
I'm glad I can provide a punching bag.
No, I mean, you make good points too. It's just that I'm fairly inflexible when it comes to this. That's the thing.
Sure. I guess I would actually more or less agree with you at the outcome. My only concern is that to leave liberalism simply within the realms of debate and peaceful protest, I'm not 100% convinced that it completely protects it. So I do wonder what extent of intoleration we should be allowing ourselves to go to in order to protect our ideals. So, just a thought. Again, I'm not arguing for physical violence.
So, this whole topic, there was actually a really good example of exactly what I'm talking about. And I have a lot of audio that we're going to go through, and you and I have a few clips. We'll play the clips and then discuss them. Like him or not, I know you disagree with him on many levels, but Bill Maher, right? I've always sort of looked to him as I tend to be more of his style of liberal, okay? Where I'm not afraid to be confrontational, but I'm also not afraid to talk to people who disagree with me, or not necessarily give them a platform, but debate them in the open. Now, he started out the week by really disappointing me. So last episode that he had, I think last Friday, he was talking to Piers Morgan, and again, Piers Morgan was making some decent points, but they were talking specifically about Trump's interview where he said that America was not so innocent when he was asked about Russia. Okay, and so I'll play the clip. And I think Piers Morgan is an idiot, but dear God, why do you have to make me sympathize with these idiots? Why do you have to make me sympathize with Trump and with Richard Spencer and Milo Yiannopoulos and Piers Morgan? Why?
You think our country is so innocent. That's what he said to Bill O'Reilly.
What's crazy about that?
Well, when I said it, they fucking threw me off ABC.
No, but seriously, what is crazy? What is crazy about that?
Okay, you're right.
You think America's innocent? Seriously? After what I just said about the Iraq War? Do you think that's innocent?
No, but I just think that
America has done bad things. Sorry, everybody.
No. But how come?
So is my country.
Putin. That's not that. Putin is a brutal dictator.
He just said America's not innocent.
There's no comparison.
Yes, but it was in response to a question when Bill O'Reilly said Putin's a killer, and he said, "Yeah, a lot of people are killers. You think we're so innocent?"
I don't think America is innocent. Britain's not innocent.
Right. This is something Noam Chomsky says.
Yeah.
It just shows that the Republican...
Is that good or bad? Sorry.
Well, it just shows the Republican Party has no principles. No principles. It's just about who wins.
Right.
Well,
it's amazing.
As opposed to the Democrats.
What?
As opposed to the Democrats who are currently behaving in exactly the histrionic way that they warned us Trump and his supporters would behave when they lost.
Wow.
So I listened to that and my head exploded. I asked the same exact question. So if you listen to that, when Maher is talking about Trump and he says, this is something that Noam Chomsky says, Piers Morgan asks, is that good or bad? I asked that question. I was like, what are you trying to say? It's bad for him to sound like Noam Chomsky? Like, yeah, Noam Chomsky is pretty extreme in some cases, but I agree with him on a lot of levels. I would want Trump to sound more like Noam Chomsky. Why is that a bad thing?
For those who don't know, Noam Chomsky is a linguist par excellence, but has actually made more of a name for himself in the political realm by being almost an anarcho-liberal, in the sense of just calling out everyone. I hesitate to say objectively because he himself doesn't have necessarily a completely unbiased approach to his political views, but nonetheless will call out the US in the same way he would Iran or Israel or China or India. He doesn't tend to take sides. He tends to place himself with the quote-unquote people and then analyse the state from there. He thinks the state is essentially a bad thing but has progressive values nonetheless.
Actually, I was going to say, you getting into this Barcelona program, it's one step closer to you becoming the next Noam Chomsky.
I am the next Noam Chomsky. I started in linguistics and I'm heading towards politics. So.
Oh, there you go.
He's got about 50 books on me, though.
I can spend hours listening to Noam Chomsky talk. I watch videos of him on YouTube all the time. He said things like, if the Nuremberg trials were enforced, every U.S. president would be considered a war criminal since the World War II, which is, if you look at the evidence, pretty true. except maybe Jimmy Carter. He said things like, if you want to stop terrorism, stop participating in it. This guy is he's not the essential liberal, but yeah, he is an anarcho-syndicalist or whatever. So he believes that, he believes more in direct democracy. And I think what Maher is saying, where he's comparing that, is specifically what Chomsky was saying, is that if the Nuremberg trials or Nuremberg tribunals were enforced, that every U.S. president since World War II would be executed as a war criminal. I think that's what he's getting to here, because he's trying to say that, Trump is saying, oh, you think our country's so innocent? And no, we're not. That's the answer. And this annoyed me to no end because he's playing for a side. And the ironic thing is that he's talking about how this shows that Republicans have no principles. Yeah. And it's like, you're not, that is so ironic. You don't even see, how can you not see that you're abandoning your own principles? Who would you rather have as president, Trump or Noam Chomsky? Answer me that question. And then you're going to complain that he's sounding like Noam Chomsky.
That's right.
And then say that it's because Republicans have no standards. You're the one operating with no standards at that moment. You're just playing for a team, which is what we've seen so much since Trump was elected. And then Piers even says that these people who are protesting are behaving exactly the same way and not accepting the results in the same way that they warned us that Trump would do. And I'm not saying that he wouldn't have, but again, according to Mrs. Malik, why should we be better? I'll tell you why we should be better, because you're not going to get people to vote for you. You're not going to get people to vote for you because all you have is better social issues. And that's it. And people don't give a shit about social issues when the economy sucks. So we're corporatists, but we're good people. Except we're going to punch you when you say things that we don't like, and we're going to riot in the streets and protest the democratic results of our election. When we warned you about Trump doing that. So that annoyed me to no end, and I was pissed. Because normally Maher is the voice of reason. I mean, he's pretty good on his approach to Islam and things like that, and he calls the left out on their inconsistencies. But he redeemed himself this week. He really did. So he announced that the upcoming guest last night's episode on Friday was going to have Milo Yiannopoulos as a guest. And actually, Jeremy Scahill, one of his frequent panelists, who I think he's an editor or a producer at The Intercept, wrote this long letter about how, I'm not even going to show up. I'm scheduled, but I'm not going to show up because, you're giving Yiannopoulos a platform. And Maher responded with a statement, and I'll just read the relevant portion. He said, quote, "Liberals will continue to lose elections as long as they follow the example of people like Mr. Scahill, whose views veer into fantasy and away from bedrock liberal principles like equality for women, respect for minorities, separation of religion and state, and free speech. If Mr. Yiannopoulos is indeed the monster Scahill claims, and he might be, nothing could serve the liberal cause better than having him exposed on Friday night," which is, in a nutshell, exactly how I feel about the situation. So he had him on, and the way that he does this is he has a panel discussion, but then he also has a one-on-one interview where they just talk. And the clips I'm going to play, we'll play them one by one and talk about them. The clips I'm going to play are from the one-on-one between Milo and Bill. And I think you'll see the merit of having conversations like this. So let's go.
About a year ago, people started to tell me, are you going to get this guy Milo, on your show? And I started to look into, what you're saying. And look, I think you're colossally wrong on a number of things.
That's okay.
But if I banned everyone from my show who I thought was colossally wrong, I would be talking to myself.
Well, you wouldn't have Ann Coulter on, which is the only time I watch the show.
I wouldn't have Jack Kingston on, who's on tonight.
Wonderful.
Okay. So I have an open mind. But...
So, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. He has had Ann Coulter on his show, and having people like Milo on your show is not a bad thing. I think it can only help you to understand. I mean, you can't fully reject something that somebody's saying without understanding what they are actually saying. And I think that if you actually are familiar with their points and understand where they're coming from and listen to their arguments, you're going to be better suited and better able to refute them.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, that's a fairly obvious point. That's the same in any debate, right?
Right, exactly. So they go on. I don't know, Adam, how familiar you are with Milo, if you've ever watched any of his content.
No, the only... he was the speaker that was meant to be at UC Berkeley, right?
Yes.
So that was the first time I heard of him.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to give you like a taste of sort of the things he says and the type of person he is, and I think you'll get a good idea of his style.
You've spoken out against all these people, like you say you don't hire gay people.
Oh, no, you can't trust them to show up to work on time. Too much drugs, too much sex, they never show up to work, always making excuses. No. I mean, not as bad as women, but no, I don't hire gays.
But you know that's not, I mean...
Oh, there we go.
But, you know, that's just...
Kidding. You're easy. You're very easy. Very easily triggered. It's pathetic.
Well, let's get to that.
You can actually see why the guy is fairly popular. His demeanor is somewhat humorous, and yet he is a real provocateur.
He's so likable. He really is.
It's annoyingly likable.
Okay, exactly. And this is why you can't silence the guy, because he goes on and talks about that being silenced, and these liberals are taking me away from you, and it's like, he's a reasonable guy. I like him. Like, I wouldn't say I really dislike him as a person. I mean, I don't know him personally, but I'd have no personal animus towards him. I don't like his views, but it would be so easy to create this guy or make him into a sympathetic figure. I mean, I get shit for this, but I watch a lot of Sargon of Akkad, and he's had a few 2.5, 3 hour conversations, live streams with Milo. And the guy has views that Sargon disagrees with. He has views that I disagree with, but he's a likable guy. He presents himself in a way that makes him, he's easy to listen to. But it's so easy to make him into a martyr because he's inherently likable. I mean, Ann Coulter, you can't make that lady into a martyr even if you tried. Even if you killed her in the street, she wouldn't be a martyr because she's so unlikable.
Not to be hyperbolic.
Not to be hyperbolic, but I mean, we are talking about physical violence and everything. But you know what I'm saying, is that she's not inherently likable. She's just kind of a witch. But he is. And so you can see how his style sort of gains some popularity.
You are so, let's say, helped by the fact that liberals just always take the bait.
Of course.
Now, you're a conservative. I'm a liberal.
Well,
that's the difference.
I don't know if I'm conservative. I mean, I'm a
libertarian.
libertarian.
You work for Breitbart, and you're a Trump supporter.
Well, it's interesting.
You're a conservative.
It's interesting that the radical gay editorials, saying interesting, provocative things about gays, are now being published by Breitbart. And I don't think really that you can call Trump a traditional conservative. He's not that Republican.
No, you're correct about that.
So I don't know if that's
fair.
He's all very dangerous. All I care about is free speech and free expression. I want people to be able to do, and say anything. These days, you're right. That's a conservative position.
I care about the environment and living also.
I care about free speech. I care about free expression. These days, that is a conservative position. How can you argue against that when people are rioting in the streets, not letting this guy talk?
That is a very, very good point, especially considering that he was also a target of one of these particular protests.
Exactly. And so... Wow. Right. This guy was actually punched if I'm not mistaken, he was actually punched at a college that he talked at. Somebody ran up on the stage and punched him. So he has had physical violence done against him because of words. And now he gets to come out here and rightly say, oh, yeah. Well, not rightly say, I would disagree with him. That's a traditionally conservative position.
But he certainly has facts to back his own position. Exactly. So he comes out and says free speech is a conservative position now. And if people don't understand context, if they don't understand history, if they don't understand, real liberal politics, like liberal policies, and that the Democrats should be the workers' party, they're going to look at that and be like, yeah, I agree with free speech and free expression. The Democrats and the liberals are trying to take it away. I'm going to vote conservative. This is how we lose. It's just how, and how can you deny what he's saying? It's clear, and you know what it does? It makes you think, if you don't have an argument against somebody, what are you going to do? You're going to try to silence them. So if you don't, it makes people think
that you don't have an effective argument against him when you can have one. You just decide not to because you have determined, yourself and the left, we've determined that what he is going to say before he says it is wrong, so we're not going to allow him to say it. That is the danger. That is why I'm so
worked up.
So worked up. I mean, I'm. You can tell I'm very worked up this episode, but this is why I'm so passionate about defending this, because this is the position you put yourself in, and you can't come out there and say he's wrong. You can't look at him and say, no, you're wrong about that.
Yeah,
because he has facts to back it up.
It's a characteristic of the modern left, I think, requiring, this absolute consistency and forgetting that people are messy and complicated, and forgetting also some obvious other human truths, I think, some realities of human psychology. Like, for instance, the reason they want to police humor, which is very important to both of us, is that they can't control it, because the one thing that authoritarians hate is the sound of laughter, because they can't control what people find funny.
And also because when people laugh, they know it's true.
Yeah, of course.
Because
nothing annoys people or amuses people like the truth.
Laughter is involuntary.
Exactly.
Another incredible point.
So what did they say about liberals and the expectation of kind of universality across the board there?
We expect not his words, but like ideological purity.
Right, and I think that's a really interesting point, because it's true. It's almost the intolerance in a sense, in that. Well, maybe this might be diverging a bit off topic, but wouldn't you argue that this is the regressive left, i.e., the left, the illiberal left, he's essentially trying to portray as the liberal left?
Right, I would absolutely agree with that. But here's the problem. Just like the Tea Party and the conservative movement and Republicans, the inmates have taken over the asylum.
Right.
The most vocal portions of the left are the regressive left. The reasonable left who, believes in free speech, who would be perfectly fine with Milo debating somebody on national television or speaking at any university, they aren't as vocal about it. And that is why I'm so worked up this episode, is because I think what the left needs to do, and this is where individuals come in, because the government, whatever, Democrats, yes, they can be what they want, and they're not going to change. People can change. You can change individuals fairly easily, more so than you can change governments. And what we need is a movement inside the left rising up and saying this is wrong, like, not to use socialist language, phrasing here, but really we have to come out and be like, yeah, this is wrong. Let him talk, debate him, make him look like an idiot on national television, or not. Let him make cogent points, and don't be an ideologue and actually agree with him when he's right. Like it lends you legitimacy if you're not just like, no, you're wrong completely. Like the people who want to obstruct Trump no matter what, and are now liberals who are saying, he just wants to remove the U.S. from leadership around the world by getting rid of TPP. What?
Out of interest, then, where do you come down on the? So there are a number of universities in the UK that have had debates over inviting potential radicalizing Muslim clerics to speak at campuses. At what point is there a voice that has to be silenced or shut out, or is there one at all for you?
No, I wouldn't say that there's one at all, but here's the thing. So, one thing that I do agree with, okay, so you have the right to free speech, and a lot of regressive liberals will say that you have the right to free speech, right? But you don't have the right to a platform. Okay. All right. I disagree with you, right? But fine. Don't give him a solo platform. Put him up there with somebody who is going to contradict him and debate him. Don't let him just sit up there and spew whatever he wants to say without being challenged.
Isn't that
make it a panel? Make it a panel discussion.
Isn't there then a further risk of perhaps not that person being able to win that debate, but at least for him to convince some. And is it at any point dangerous in your kind of perception to allow even the potential conversion of some people to a radical ideology, whether it be, Muslim extremism or Nazism or, anything else that is a threat to a liberal ideology?
Well, I struggle with that. So, on the one hand, I say...
Because, sorry, if you don't mind my butting in, because what you're assuming is, or what you're hoping for is that reason and logic wins. Because we're talking about kind of a debate platform, we're talking about kind of a public dimension of our community, which we expect to run on kind of, or at least for the arguments to run on reason and logic. But there's much more than reason and logic, and there's much more even within reason and logic that we're willing to assume people will accept. So, for instance, for a Palestinian who's lived under or has been booted out of their home for the Israeli settlements to move in, it's perfectly reasonable and logical to hate the Israeli government. Whereas, for others that might seem absurd.
Yeah, well, I guess what I would say then is just make sure that you have effective opposition. So we went to college together, and they had a debate between Bart Ehrman and Dinesh D'Souza on whether or not God exists. Okay, and Bart Ehrman won that debate hands down because Dinesh D'Souza doesn't know the difference between his butt and his elbow. So
as the Christian half of this dynamic duo, I absolutely agree. Bart Ehrman essentially wiped the floor with Dinesh D'Souza in that particular debate. It was a very, very good debate.
Well, Bart Ehrman is a tremendous scholar. The guy's very, very well versed in the topic, and you bring in somebody who's a politician who knows almost nothing about the topic. That's neither here nor there. Okay, so when it comes to really radicalizing ideologies like that, like Islam and Nazism, I guess yes, you probably do have to tread lightly. But the problem is though that if somebody's prone to radicalization, they are more. Are they really not going to be radicalized by themselves? Is it not better to at least have them there with a counterpoint? Because if they're going to radicalize themselves with online forums and things like that, there's not going to be any counterpoints. There's not going to be any arguments against it.
But your assumption then is that radicalization is something more along the lines of, or at least I'm imagining you're saying along the lines of Muslim extremism. But what if it is kind of radicalization along the line of Make America Great Again? At what cost? At X cost? What if it is something that is perhaps a little bit more nuanced or already partially accepted within our societies?
Well, I'm not as concerned about that in the United States because technically we're not a democracy, we're a republic, so we have the separation of powers between legislative, executive, and judicial, and it would be so hard for that sort of thing to happen. It would be very difficult for that sort. Yeah, Donald Trump's elected, but really, how much is he going to be able to implement? His travel ban was overturned in court.
But again, it gets back to my point in which that Trump might not actually be necessarily the worry, but the Trump administration and the particular support base that he has, and essentially the potential erosion of the democratic and liberal values that are there, not because of Trump, but because of the people, and the acceptance of counter liberal values by the people. Now, we might be getting a bit off topic again, but.
Yeah, a little bit, but it is relevant though because Milo does say a lot of. He doesn't necessarily say radicalizing things, but he does say rather provocative things. So you might, by giving him a platform, you might then somebody who's on the fence might move to a more extreme version of conservatism. So yeah, I guess there is a threat there, but in the age that we live in now, so yes, okay, I probably agree with you more. In an age before we have the internet, because I think there is a very real problem where radical ideas are sort of jettisoned to parts of the internet where you can find them if you want them, but once you get there, there's no argument against it. It's very much an echo chamber. When back in the day with Hitler, where you had state-run newspapers and you didn't get any information anywhere else, then you go to a rally and you hear this. You're not hearing any sort of, I think rallies and stuff like that back then were much more effective at radicalizing people. And if you had a debate back and forth, right, that's one of the only places that you would see two people of opposite opinions duking it out and debating. Now we have so much access to this sort of stuff. If you don't have debates out there, if you don't have debates easily accessible, you're creating echo chambers, and echo chambers are, I think, more at risk of radicalizing people than open, honest debates. At least with a debate, you have another side. I mean, Breitbart, there is no other side. The Daily Stormer and, these fascistic websites and ISIS's websites, there is no other side. So let me put it to you this way then. Yeah, okay, maybe you have somebody who might be radicalized, but maybe you have somebody on the fence of radicalization who then sees somebody else make valid points against what they believe, and it creates that tiny bit of doubt. You're not going to blow yourself up over a tiny bit of doubt. You have to be completely sold out to what you believe to do that. You're not going to kill yourself for something that you have doubts about. You know what I'm saying?
No, that's fair.
And I think the purpose of this sort of thing is to create that doubt. And you know what? The purpose of this sort of thing is to challenge me too, and to create doubt inside myself, because I don't want to believe things that aren't true. And we need to be open as liberals. This is the problem. We determine what is true before even considering having the conversation. So we've determined that whatever Milo says is going to be false, right? Well, maybe not you or I, but some people determine what he's going to say. If you're going to, okay, here's the thing. If you're going to riot and break $100,000 worth of private property over somebody speaking at a university, you have determined that they are wrong no matter what, and you are going to stop at nothing to stop them from talking. And I think the problem is that, what if some of the things he's saying are right? Right? So just entertain this for a second, okay?
Sure.
Obviously, what he said about women and equality and all that stuff, not right. But what if he has an ancillary point that's correct, right? Like, I don't know, like he's very open and honest about radical Islamic terrorism. When you have a lot of liberals who defend Islam, the religion, at whatever cost, if he has a valid point about that, right, and people can see that that's true, but the left is just saying, no matter what, he's wrong, you're not going to attract people to your position because you're an ideologue. You need to be open to the idea that you might be wrong. And I know that's scary. I mean, I know that you and I like to think that we're right about everything, but you're never going to know if you're right about everything unless you talk to people who disagree with you. Right. So I'm not even saying that I want these debates just because conservatives are 100% wrong and we want, Bill Maher to make him look like an idiot and convince them how wrong they are because they are wrong. It's also for my own edification. It's also so that I can learn and I can grow and I can be confronted with ideas, because if you're not confronted, if you cannot defend what you believe, if you're not confronted, like you don't hone that edge, you're not going to have reasons to explain what you believe. I mean, you're a Christian. What did Paul say? Always be ready to give reason for what you believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
You can't if you're not ever challenged. So, like we talked at some point about echo chambers with Facebook algorithms and stuff, and now I get articles from Occupy Democrats. Occupy Democrats is left-wing propaganda, okay? It honestly is. And so you can't, it's just not an effective way to get at truth, to be constantly reaffirming what you already think, right? If facts go against what you think, people who disagree with you are going to bring them up, and then you can filter through that and determine, is there nuance here? Is he right? Do I need to amend my beliefs? Or is there a mechanism inside my beliefs to account already for these facts, right? rather than be just like, oh, he's wrong, let's burn some crap and pepper spray somebody in the face because we don't want him to talk. I'm sorry, I'm really passionate about this.
I agree with you on the particular mechanics of a debate. I think it's good to be challenged. I'm just very much aware, maybe, again, I'm making assumptions about Milo now, having literally heard only those few clips that you've already played me. But presumably, he is a known figure. His ideology is known. For instance, I think it was Abu Hamza was one of the radicalized Muslim clerics here that ended up getting deported. We know where he stood, and we know that he spoke out against the values of our society, of our democracy, of our liberal views. In other words, I'm just not willing to go the whole hog, knowing that there is potential for putting our most prized values at risk, political values at least at risk.
Right. But what if your values are wrong?
Well, I guess it comes back to how you would define what values are and how you determine their particular goodness, and which that is an entirely separate...
That's a completely new podcast.
Exactly. But I would slip in here Kuyperian separation of spheres.
Actually, I like Kuyper. Back when I was a Christian, I loved Kuyper. So let's get back to Milo a little bit. In that last clip that we just listened to, we just talked about the left insisting upon ideological purity, but he also said that authoritarians hate the sound of laughter. And that, when you laugh about things, and this is a point that Bill Maher made, when you laugh about things, there's like this admission there that what's being said is true. When you laugh at things because you understand at some level there is truth. Behind every joke, right? I've heard it said, many a truth is said in jest. And I think that's very true. But there's the problem is when you have provocative comedians, and that's kind of what Milo fancies himself as a provocative conservative comedian. When he's making jokes, right, we silence or we disagree and we don't want those jokes said, or some in the left don't want those jokes said because they're coming from a conservative position. But when you have people like George Carlin, Joan Rivers, who say these abhorrent, ridiculous things. I mean, Joan Rivers was unbelievably a shock comedian. Like, she would say some of the very things that sounded racist. Like that if Milo were to say, the left would explode. I mean, Joan said that she literally said Michelle Obama is obviously a tranny. She said that. Oh, right. She said that Houston is disgusting, is crawling with bugs. Oh wait, no, that's Whitney Houston. I think when she was dead. So like she's literally crawling with bugs. Like, she said these things, and then Obama came out and called her a national treasure. So. No, I'm serious. So, like, yeah, okay, left-leaning comedians, when you know their politics are left-wing, when they say a joke, oh, okay, it's funny, you're a national treasure. When somebody who's conservative says those things and jokes, right, there's not an acceptance of it. And so maybe they believe what they're saying as a joke, but they are saying it as a joke. They're trying to get laughs. They're trying to be a comedian. And there is that inconsistency there, and I think that he does pull that out.
When you laugh, even if you don't really agree in that part of your mind.
Exactly.
Go, oh, shit,
and so I go, when my college talks, you've got the professors at the front who are there to kind of monitor me, to make sure I don't go off the rails. And I make a joke about Ted Cruz or something, and they're like, you can see it. You can see it. And the other thing that's really important is not just that, but the other thing is, humor isn't how you drive people apart. These sort of policing humor for racism and sexism is utterly wrong-headed. Not just because normally it isn't there, but because that's how we build bridges, not how we break them. When you make a joke, that's how you connect with somebody. You make jokes at the bar, you make awkward small talk. Humor's what brings people together, not what drives them apart. Right. And these basic, fundamental human psychological insights, the progressive left is forgotten.
The one area.
What do you think about that?
I wonder if he's taking too far too large a view of the topic of humour, because there is certainly humour that drives people apart. So in other words, like there are. So don't get me wrong, I very much agree with particularly the comedian's duty to push the envelope, like beyond what most people would consider to be okay. But in doing that, you do alienate people. So essentially what you're saying is, I'm forcing you not to agree with me, but to partake in something that you don't want to partake in, almost. The only concern I have with his position, so if he makes a sexist, racist joke, you're hoping, or he's hoping, that, you know, women or non-whites can comfortably sit in that room and just take it and laugh at themselves and laugh at him. I'm not entirely sure that would be universally true. So I think in terms of kind of the absoluteness of that statement, I'd be hesitant to grant.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think it's an absolute statement, but you do see an alarming trend where people are way too oversensitive about jokes. I think you can agree with that, at least.
Yes. I do tend to like folks like George Carlin and Louis C.K. who really do kind of
I love Louis C.K.
push that envelope out there.
The guy's hilarious. Another one I like, I think that you would like too, is Bill Burr.
I haven't heard
Bill
of
Burr
it.
is hilarious. He's from Boston.
Right, okay.
So yeah, this is the final clip, but I thought this was really good too.
You're a little broken, and you're very wrong about certain things.
Like all comedians.
Like Black Lives Matter is a hate group, and that there's no such thing as white privilege. I mean, you do know that that's
We're happy to do, look, we can disagree on those things, and that's wonderful. The one thing that should unite us, the one thing that I think that you and I can both agree on, and the one thing that was so remarkable when that, I mean, I've never heard of him before, that silly man who had a hissy fit this week who refused to come on the show, that doesn't understand, is that if you don't show up to debate, you lose.
Right.
That is a very good point.
Yeah. And that's sort of what I was getting at earlier when I was talking about Wayne Gretzky, and 100% of the shots you don't take don't go in.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was more or less what they ended off with, and I thought it was excellent. Like I said, I enjoyed all 11 minutes of that interview. I don't agree with some of the things he said, but watching the two go back and forth on it was great. And when he sits there and says what he just said, how aggravating is it that he sounds more reasonable than a lot of people on the left? How unbelievably unacceptable is that?
And how annoyed do you feel now, actually taking a side?
Oh, very unbelievably angry. We both watch Jonathan Pye, his videos.
That's right.
He had a bit about this, the UC Berkeley protests, and Trump's tweet about UC Berkeley, and he literally was screaming, "How dare you make me defend that orange sack of minge? Like, it's true. How dare you? How dare you make me defend him? How dare you?" How can you make me defend Milo Yiannopoulos? How can you make me defend Ann Coulter and Richard Spencer and Donald Trump? We should be universally attacking them with our words and debating them and showing other people where they're wrong. But no, I have to sit here and spend an entire podcast episode defending them and telling you how to be a liberal. How, like, explaining to you basic liberal concepts, like, and I know that we have a little bit of disagreement here, but
we disagree on some of the nuances and some of the kind of the extreme sides of these arguments. By the way, can I just say British vocabulary is amazing. it's very, very fun.
I know that there are people who listen to our podcast who are not fans of vulgarity, so I didn't go any further. He had about a 3-minute rant where it was just incredibly spewing words I had to look up. I didn't even know what he was saying, and brilliance. If you're not subscribed to Jonathan Pye on YouTube, do so now. He's great.
We do recommend it.
Oh, it's amazing. His stick is great, but he's right in that situation, and we now are in the awkward position as liberals of having to defend people that we disagree with. And that's not a bad thing. Defending people you disagree with, I think, can be admirable, especially when they're facing wrongs or having their rights taken away. Obviously, you can't be a hack. You have to defend your principles across the board wherever they're violated. And like I said, I would encourage anybody to go out and watch that whole interview. Watch the panelist discussion. It wasn't as good. Watch some of his videos. I mean, he's a provocateur. He's wrong about most things. He's likable, though. But you'll see, he's not he's not this monstrosity, this monster that needs to be silenced. If anything, he needs to be engaged because he has a fan base. And you can see why. You can see why he has a fan base. And the people rally behind him because he's being silenced. Or people are trying to silence him. Don't silence him. That's the answer. Talk to the guy and debate him. And that's my rant. I don't really have that much more to say about it.
Well, in that case, then, is there anything that you would recommend, practically beyond just don't silence people, that those who believe in kind of liberal and progressive values can actually do? We're a full month into the Trump presidency now. I think it's just a couple of days away before it's been a full month. Is there anything that you'd recommend that individuals could do?
Yeah. So I would say be vocal. When you see stuff like this, don't agree with it. Don't defend it. Be consistent. So if you were against TPP before Trump was elected, be against it after he's elected. That crazy idea. If you like Noam Chomsky, don't compare President Trump to Noam Chomsky like it's a bad thing. And I think more importantly, I have a lot of people who would call themselves progressive, right? And in many things they are, like policy-wise, they are. I have this fear, though, that the left is sort of moving away from the importance of their traditional policy goals, like the stuff that got us elected in the first place, like, economic policies that help working people.
Right, exactly.
Like that the corporate Democrats in the United States are not. I guess, and that's why I'm fearful is that we're focusing so much on identity politics and trying to silence people that we disagree with and trying to be the morality police, that we are moving away from focusing on policy. So what I would say is focus all your conversations on policy. If somebody disagrees with you on gay marriage or transgender rights, then table that and don't try to make them feel like, bigots or like terrible people because they believe that, even though they might be.
Yeah.
But engage them on things that that they agree with you on. Talk to them about President Trump effectively lowering a lot of people's salaries because he's going to do away with Obama's rule on raising the threshold for overtime pay. Talk to them about why Obamacare is kind of okay and you don't want to move back to the system that we had before. At least it's a little bit better than the system that we had before. Talk about comparative politics and healthcare systems around the world. Talk about substantive issues that will help them throughout the day. Not, oh, you're a bad person because you laughed at that joke. You're a bad person because you like Milo Yiannopoulos. Okay, I kind of like Milo Yiannopoulos, and I'm as liberal as you can possibly imagine. So, or at least policy-wise I am. And so focus on the things that you're going to get agreement with. Don't fall into this trap of making them into a bad person because they disagree with you on a few things. And more importantly, I think, well, not more importantly, but just as importantly, call out the left when they're doing stuff that's not liberal. Because if you don't, then we're going to, the image that people have in their head of liberals are going to be what the most vocal people make it. So if somebody punches a Nazi, rather than retweeting it and saying, yeah, you go, or not saying anything at all, tweet about how it's terrible and you don't agree with it. If you don't agree with the protests that are shutting out Milo Yiannopoulos from talking, post about it on Facebook. Make people around you aware that's what you think. Because if you don't, so I'm guilty of this. Like, I don't discuss politics with my family at all. When I go home and talk to them, they assume all these things about me, like that I like Bill Clinton, or that, oh well, why were you against the sex scandals with Bill Clinton, but you're not, or why were you not against the sex scandals with Bill Clinton, but you make it such a big deal for Trump? You know, it's like, first of all, I don't. Like, I believe it's wrong in both of those cases. I'm not a partisan hack. But the problem is that if you don't defend true liberal values and you don't call the left out when they're not liberal, then people are going to associate liberalism with the most vocal parts of it, which is the regressive left. The inmates have taken over the asylum, I'm sorry to say. And that's what needs to happen. I mean, individuals need to, who are liberal, who are sane, need to make it clear that they are. And I need to do it. I don't know if you need to do it. I think you're probably pretty transparent, but I know I need to do that with my family.
No, I'm fairly vocal. I'll call people out.
Yeah, you're better than I am then. But it really became clear to me after Trump was elected, because it was almost like my family viewed Trump getting elected as like, oh yeah, a personal thing getting back at me because I'm like this terrible liberal who wants to shut down free speech and do all that stuff. I'm like, I don't want any of that. I want to help you. Like, I want to help all Americans. Like, I want good things for the country. I hated Hillary Clinton as a candidate. Like, I didn't want her elected as much as I didn't want Trump elected. I voted for Bernie Sanders. And so it's just like, if you're not vocal about it, if you don't, and this is the thing. So what makes people, in my experience at least, what makes people realize that they were wrong about a certain group of people, right, is getting to know actual people out of that group. So what makes people less homophobic? Having gay friends. What makes people less like thinking that, you know, people of another skin tone are worse than them? Actually getting to know them. You know, it's hard to be bigoted and have this conflated idea of what these people are when you don't know any of them. So if you don't know a reasonable liberal and all you're seeing is what's portrayed on the media, then you're not going to think there are any reasonable liberals. That's right. And there are a lot of them. I have a lot of friends who are reasonable liberals, but they're not vocal because you just, you know, I mean, they don't see a reason to be vocal. But this is the reason, because we are going to continue to lose if we do not shape the narrative of liberalism. And the only people that can do that at this point are individuals, because the current Democrats aren't going to do it. You know, third parties don't have enough sway to do it. It's our job, you know, and that's, I guess, the battle cry of this podcast. That's what we're here to do. You
feeling better? You feeling good?
No, I'm not feeling better.
No, not even after getting all that.
Well, actually, no, it does feel good to get it off my chest, but
therapeutic.
It is therapeutic. I feel like this is going to be I don't like when the podcast is so heavy on one person, but I
no, that's fine. It's your hobby horse. Is that the right word? Anyway, it's your thing.
Yeah, essentially,
it's your passion.
Oh gosh, but now I had not been thinking about it all day. I wrote the script for this last night, and now I'm thinking about it again, and now I'm all upset. So yeah, screw you liberals. I'm gonna go watch some Milo videos.
I came across a few. Do you know Bernice King, MLK Jr.'s daughter?
Yeah.
So she recently kind of got into the news a little bit just for releasing kind of a list of 10 things to do during the Trump administration. But I think a few of them kind of help us here in this podcast. So one of them was focus on his policies, not his appearance or mental state. This is speaking of Trump. Keep your message positive. Those who oppose peace and justice want the country to be angry and fearful because this is the soil on which their darkest policies will grow. No more helpless or hopeless talk. I thought that was a very good one, actually, because I think
that is a great one.
I think it's very easy to be, and I was hinting at this earlier, kind of the victim. It's like, oh, we lost. It's absolutely helpless. It's hopeless. We can't actually bring these guys to. That's rubbish. Like we need to continue to back up our arguments to continue, and simply resist and persist. It's about peaceful demonstration, and in the words of John Lennon, she adds, when it gets down to having to use violence, when you are playing the system's game, the establishment will irritate you, pull your beard, flick your face, to make you fight. Because once they've got you violent, then they know how to handle you. The only thing they don't know how to handle is non-violence and humour.
Would you like to retract your statement that you should punch a Nazi when you have the chance?
No. What I said was that is unethical. And personally, I wouldn't punch a Nazi in the face. However, what I did say was that if you have a chance, take a chance.
I'm just trying to needle you. I'm sorry.
One actual very practical thing that I thought was quite good, and perhaps we should start adopting it into this podcast, is she advocated for calling the Trump administration the Republican administration. Or talking about things that Republicans are doing, because then what you're doing is you're, one, forcing the Republican legislators to either take responsibility or to disassociate from the Trump White House. And then perhaps Republicans start changing their views and get concerned when re-election comes up. So I thought that was a very, very practical thing. So perhaps that's something that we can adopt for the podcast.
Oh, yeah. That's just, who else but the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. to give us those insights, because that's what her father did.
Indeed, exactly. It comes almost directly from the source itself. So.
Full circle.
Exactly.
All right. I'm done.
Well
that
done.
Took a lot
well
out of
done.
me.
No, I can feel your release of tension. So.
So I think that's it for the episode, to be honest with you. As a little aside, we didn't have a Trump update this week, and actually, now that we've read Mrs. King's advice there, we might scrap the Trump update with the goofy music, because we want to be a little bit more policy, substance-oriented.
Yeah.
But there was a press conference. I don't know if you saw it. If you didn't see it, you... Yeah, listeners, if you didn't see it, you probably live under a rock. Literally, it's now been nicknamed the press conference because of how absurd it was. So, on the way out of this episode, we're just going to, I think, close it off with just some highlights, the best bits from the news conference, because it was something to behold. To be honest with you, while I was at work, an impromptu crowd gathered around the TV as it was playing, because it was so unbelievable to see a president behaving in that manner. It was unsettling even. So we have that for you. As always, follow us on Twitter at CommonersPod for updates on upcoming episodes and news. We haven't decided about doing another live stream, but I know that we want to at some point.
Nothing scheduled yet.
One thing that we are excited about is that at some point, hopefully next week, maybe in 2 weeks, we are going to be having our first podcast guest.
Hey! And who's that going to be, John?
It's a friend that I went to school with named Chris. I don't know if he will want me to give out his last name here, so I'll just give him his first name, Chris. He is currently in law school, studying, I believe, constitutional law, and we went to school together. We both went to the same college, and he is a conservative, very much so a conservative, and we wanted to talk to him about Trump's pick for Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch, his history, his judicial philosophy, and give some questions about what we can expect the Supreme Court to do and what direction we can expect it to head under a Trump presidency, and specifically with the addition of Mr. Gorsuch if he is confirmed, because I know that there will be an impact on a lot of upcoming court cases. So in the interest of debating and talking with people outside of our particular political viewpoints, we thought having Chris on, who's a very articulate, intelligent person who will be able to back up his views onto the podcast to have a discussion.
I'm really looking forward to it, actually. I knew Chris a little bit when I was in college, so I'll be looking forward to chatting to him again.
Finally was able to nail down a recording time with him, because he's very busy, but he's really excited, and I'm really excited. I love Chris, so it should be a great conversation.
Great. And don't forget to catch Political Animals our weekly update of the news, and then of course a little bit of editorial opinion at the end as well, where John and I kind of separately just give you an opinion on something that we're interested in, something that we've caught in the news, or something that's been on our mind that week.
Anyway, that's it for today's episode. Here are the highlights from Trump's press conference. I hope you enjoy it. Until next time, stay informed.
I'm here today to update the American people on the incredible progress that has been made in the last 4 weeks since my inauguration. The press has become so dishonest that if we don't talk about it, we are doing a tremendous disservice to the American people. I turn on the TV, open the newspapers, and I see stories of chaos. Chaos. Yet it is the exact opposite. This administration is running like a fine-tuned machine. President Putin called me up very nicely to congratulate me on the win of the election. He then called me up extremely nicely to congratulate me on the inauguration, which was terrific. And the leaks are absolutely real. The news is fake because so much of the news is fake. But I'm having a good time. Tomorrow they will say, Donald Trump rants and raves at the press. I'm not ranting and raving. I'm just telling you, you're dishonest people. But I'm not ranting and raving. I love this. I'm having a good time doing it. But tomorrow the headlines are going to be, Donald Trump rants and raves. I'm not ranting and raving. We had Hillary Clinton give Russia 20% of the uranium in our country. You know what uranium is, right? It's a thing called nuclear weapons and other things, like lots of things are done with uranium, including some bad things. Politically, it would be unpopular for a politician to make a deal. I can't believe I'm saying I'm a politician, but I guess that's what I am now.
There's been a report out that 48 bomb threats have been made against Jewish centers all across the country in the last couple of weeks. There are people who are committing anti-Semitic acts or threatening to.
You see, he said he was going to ask a very simple, easy question. And it's not. It's not. Not a simple question, not a fair question. Okay, sit down. I understand the rest of your question. So here's the story, folks. Number one, I am the least anti-Semitic person that you've ever seen in your entire life. We lived in a divided nation. And I am going to try. I will do everything within my power to fix that.
The spy vessel off the coast of the United States.
Not good.
There was a ballistic missile test that many interpret as
Not
a violation
good.
of an
Not
agreement
good.
between the two countries, and a Russian plane buzzed a U.S. destroyer.
Not good. We are running, this is a fine-tuned machine. Hillary Clinton did a reset. Remember with the stupid plastic button that made us all look like a bunch of jerks? Here, take a look. You know what uranium is, right? It's a thing called nuclear weapons and other things, like lots of things are done with uranium. He looked at her like, what the hell is she doing with that cheap plastic button? We are going to attack Mosul in 4 months. The greatest thing I could do is shoot that ship that's 30 miles offshore right out of the water. But tomorrow the headlines are going to be, Donald Trump rants and raves. I'm not ranting and raving. I'm actually having a very good time, okay? Donald Trump rants and raves at the press. I'm not ranting and raving. I'm just telling you, you're dishonest people. I'm not ranting and raving. I love this. I'm having a good time doing it. And I can tell you one thing about a briefing that we're allowed to say, because anybody that ever read the most basic book can say it. Nuclear holocaust would be like no other. Next week, we are going to attack Mosul. I am the least anti-Semitic person that you've ever seen. Did you hear him? Bibi. He said, I've known Donald Trump for a long time. And then he said, forget it. We're going to attack Mosul in 1 month. Hillary Clinton, that was a reset. Remember it said reset? Now, if I do that, I'm a bad guy. She gave all that valuable uranium away. She did other things. They say I'm close to Russia. Hillary Clinton gave away 20% of the uranium in the United States. She's close to Russia.
And the congressional.
Well, I would. I tell you what. Do you want to set up the meeting? Do you want to set up the meeting?
No.
Are they friends of yours?
Just a reporter.
No, set up the meeting.
I know some of them.
Where are you from?
BBC.
Here's another beauty. Are you a friendly reporter? Watch how friendly he is. I'm changing it from fake news, though.
Doesn't that undermine...
Very fake news.
I know, but aren't you...
Quiet. See, he lied about he was going to get up and ask a very straight, simple question.
On the travel ban, would you accept that that was a good example of the smooth running of government?
Yeah, I do. Let me tell you about the travel.
Were there any mistakes in that?
Wait. I know who you are. Just wait. Now that's what I call a nice question. Thought I had a meeting with Congressman Cummings, and he was all excited. And then he said, "Be bad." He wanted it. Politically, it would be unpopular for a politician to make a deal. I can't believe I'm saying I'm a politician, but I guess that's what I am now.